Welcome to BizTech Forward, your go-to podcast for cutting-edge insights at the intersection of business and technology. Let's move forward together.
Hi, and welcome to the new episode of BizTech Forward. I'm your host, Anni, and today we are heading to Latin America. Latin America is making big moves in AI, FinTech, and open banking, and attracting major investments in data centers and global partnerships. But what does this mean for businesses, customers, and innovation? To discuss all that, joining me today is Marcos Mauro, head of LATAM region at DataArt. Hi, Marcos. So happy to have you here.
Hey, Annie. How are you?
And just to briefly introduce our guest, Marcos joined DataArt in 2014 to lead the company's first R&D center in Latin America. Over his 20-plus year career, Marcos has worn many hats, from developer to project, product, and program manager, leading diverse teams across various projects and industries. His passion for understanding client needs naturally extended into sales, eventually leading him to manage different sales operations. Today, Marcos is overseeing DataArt operations across the continent, as well as driving brand development and talent acquisitions. Again, Marcos, I'm so happy to have you here with us, and welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
Okay, so Marcos, I want to start with the big picture. So, Latin America has often been viewed as an emerging tech region, but now I feel like something is really shifting. So is that so? And if yes, what is behind this shift?
Well, Latin America, it's been happening a lot all around Latin America. But I think the tech surge is really the result of a few converging factors. Over the past few years, we've seen significant influx of both local and international investment, which have not only boosted the startup ecosystem, but also kind of accelerated the digital transformation across industries. That made that the more mature players are kind of following what the trendsetters are doing in the region. And, that also kind of goes along with the whole situation in education. There's a lot of tendency from governments to support STEM education and tech skills development on top of new schools and new ways of learning how to code. There's a lot of interesting going on, and this created a whole trend of entrepreneurs and also established companies, pushing for this tech surge.
Right. And is there any example you can give on this to just quickly paint the picture?
Sure, there's a bunch, but one concrete example is how, for example, digital payment and FinTech services are bursting in the region. Initially, fully digital startups drove that innovation, and the landscape was of absolute regulatory uncertainty. So basically, there was no regulation around it. And, the startups just were trying to come up with something that, the general public would adopt, right? So what happened is that after that, consumers really caught on, and a lot of the people that were out there in the market, started using these new tools, these new platforms for their digital finance, and basically that created this great opportunities for big companies, and companies that were big enough to do lobbying and eventually push the market even further. So basically, what happened is that the banks kind of stood on the shoulders of the startups, basically, and what the startups had built. And that way, they pushed regulation. Now the things are kind of catching up, and there's a lot of investment around it. For example, in Argentina, Chile, Colombia, Brazil, and Mexico. The thing that is also that with all this innovation and investment, basically the companies that are driving that innovation, are also becoming the best employers in their markets. So basically, it's super cool to work for these startups. It's super cool to work for example, a new bank's IT factory, which is super nicely set up and whatnot, because there's a lot of investment and there's a lot of opportunity in the market. So basically what that is creating is another trend that definitely affects the talent market, right? So basically in the talent market, there's a lot of people that want to become part of that. And they want to study, they want to become, professionals in IT. They want to be part of that because that brings them into, this great reality of being an IT worker and working for this great companies and being like that. So yeah, I think that there are many cases that one could eventually mention, but I think that the fintech in particular, how it came to be, is also representing a lot of what's happening in the region, because it's also happening in InsurTech, it's also happening in retail as well, in the same fashion, right? So good old retailers kind of trying to mimic what the newest digital companies are doing and the newest startups are doing. So it's a similar kind of competition that is creating a great shift in the market.
Oh, that's so interesting, Marcos. Actually, yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned fintech right away, because I did read recently some big article about how fintech is really taking off in LATAM, and they were specifically emphasizing Mexico. So is that correct? Is that the leader?
Absolutely. I mean, fintech in Mexico is like, it's the perfect storm happening, but in the good way. So, across Latin America, fintechs are booming because of the variety of reasons. Mexico in particular, indeed stands out. So a key driver for this, if you think about it, is a combination, again, of, a very, very large, previously underbanked population. So you have to understand that there's a lot of people in Latin America. They don't have any banking services. They don't use any. And you would say, well, how does that work? Well, basically they use cash. They get their money in cash. They have informal work. They just get a certain amount of money and then they spend it, but it's basically cash, paper, notes. That's just the way it goes, but it's for a big chunk of Latin America. Believe it or not, that is like more than 40%. So basically all of the people, were basically excluded of the finances sector, right? So what that created is a strong opportunity, but also at the same time there's very, very high penetration of mobile devices, for example. So people probably don't have banks, but they have a mobile device, right? So that it's a perfect platform to, serve really capillary, really great financial services. So that is the opportunity that startups took. And in Mexico in particular, it's a perfect representation of that. It's the biggest Spanish-speaking market. So basically, it makes a lot of sense that it's booming even beyond what's happening in the rest of Latin America, because the opportunity is bigger, the investments are bigger, and again, these two things, I think, that created kind of the perfect setup so that fintechs could emerge. But if you think about it, it goes even beyond just banking services. But think about it, right? Let's say that there's a guy walking across the street trying to sell you churros, for example, right? So he's walking with a basket of churros, right? And formerly that person would say, okay, do you want some churros? And then he would get, you would pay in cash and he would give you churros. But now, for example, there are many things that can change. Like, for example, some of the financial companies and startups are providing, a payment instrument for that person to have. He can receive digital payments, but not only that, he can also pay digitally for other goods that he uses to make the churros. And there are a myriad of financial services. It's micro financial services, if you think about it, but with great capillarity and great numbers, right? So there's like an untapped market of people that formerly didn't have banks, and now all of a sudden, they can go ahead and sell their churros, using digital payments, which seems absolutely normal in other parts of the world, but in Latin America, it probably was the cornerstone of why these things worked. because it's cumbersome to walk around with money. You have to understand that, these countries and the general public, when they are using money, they are also subject to, it's not the dollar or the euro, right? So it's it's a peso, probably some local peso, which is depreciated all the time. It's subject to inflation. Your notes no longer are probably good for nothing. You have to carry a ton of them in order to pay for stuff. So it's incredibly cumbersome and difficult. So now all of a sudden, these people that were completely excluded from going, all tidy up to one of the bank branches and asking for credit, now they can get it in the palm of their hands, thanks to this innovation, which again, is very common in other geographies, but in Latin America is happening right now. And now everybody's, jumping onto that wave.
Marcos, this is so interesting. And I really personally appreciate the churros example. That's one. And also, I wanted to tell you, I cannot not mention it because last year I traveled to Argentina and sometimes the cash wouldn't fit into my purse. And I felt so rich, Marcos, that I will never feel that again. But I had pictures. I felt on top of the world. This is the psychological effect that it had on me. So right. just hearing you say that just takes me back to your wonderful country. So yeah, that's really interesting. Also, it sounds like the way you speak about all this modernization, it sounds like LATAM market and LATAM tech is focused on actually building new solutions as opposed to modernizing old ones and legacy systems. Is that correct?
Absolutely. You're spot on that. So it's not merely about, swapping out the legacy systems for newer ones, but it's a complete new game. It's an overhaul of business model. So companies are now leveraging this technology to rethink their operations, to engage customers more deeply, and to create entirely new value propositions. So the customer flows they're tending to are just completely new and different, and they're getting users started. Just takes way less from them than before. Like the example I just gave you about, this person just going to a branch, and trying to say, well, I want my first bank account, and it just being difficult and cumbersome, and all of a sudden, now being tending to these user flows that are just completely different, but then just give you a complete array of services that before were just impossible to push to those consumers, right? So it's a completely new game. Like, for example, it goes like into microcredits, for example. Let's go back to churro example. If the person is selling out all of his churros every day, he needs a machine, to make some churros and do it faster, right? So he needs some credit, but that credit is not a big one, right? Because it's just, one of these elliptical machines, that can just do things a little faster than by hand. And that is a new product that can be served just thanks to this innovation, right? So it's not just simply, trying to convert the old customer base into something a little bit more modern, but it's just expanding business. And that also takes me back to the reasons why, investments are so often found across the region, and because there's so much opportunity to build all this user flows and products that have great adoption, really very little barriers, entry barriers, and they were great for people because they just make sense, right?
Marcus, as a smooth transition to something else I wanted to talk about, because in today's world, there is no way to have any discussion without mentioning AI and data. So I need to ask you, where does AI and data stand these days in LATAM tech? How is it going?
It's a definitely a hot topic for sure. AI and data have been probably transformative forces across a variety of sectors. years, for almost 2 years now. This fintech, agriculture, healthcare, retail. I can see this ecosystem only growing of schools, startups, government initiatives. Everything seems to be focused to harnessing all these technologies and using them for something, right? So there's a big appetite of basically just using the technology, right? At the same time, we can see increasing investment in data analytics, AI, and this both from public and private sectors, basically to improve customer experiences. But most of all, you see the private sector trying to optimize their operations. They think, this technology can help me cut down costs, optimize my operations, optimize my, retail channels, optimize my sales, even the manufacturing, there's ways of optimizing, cutting losses and whatnot. So there's a big push. I think that for quite a few years at DataArt, we've been kind of big enough to use it as a monitor of certain trends. I've been around for a few years already at DataArt, but I kind of use it to see what's going on. And I can tell you, like, for example, for the past year, the majority of senior people that we've hired across Latin America were all for this kind of project. I'm talking about people with AI background, data scientists, data engineers, people that work with data and build large language models and AI in general, right? So I can tell you it's confirmed that it's a trend. It's not only a hot topic like to talk about, but there's also many companies investing and doing more and starting to use, for example, our services, but like their own as well. There's a lot of demand in this area across the region.
So Latin America is definitely not just a consumer of AI, it's actually becoming a leader in developing and applying it.
Yeah, in Latin America, we're not only adopting AI solutions, but we're also kind of innovating on those. So basically, we're not just followers in that trend. We're also setting certain trends, and this goes across different areas and types of projects and also industries. Right, so we can see that there's been a lot of collaboration between startups and schools and again government initiatives, for example, to try to bring up this talent that is needed to support these innovations and these AI power solutions, like for example in the agricultural space, which is so uniquely developed in Latin America, we're seeing it a lot. So when you see that a technology is being used to serve local demand, local need, that's where you can know that that region in particular is creating something, not only following, right, but even creating something. There's a lot of digital imagery kind of applications, the agricultural sector. There's a lot going on, and this is to serve local needs, right? So not only to have developers, working for some project in the United States, but it's also for our, local needs in the region.
Oh, that's so cool that you actually mention an example that actually affects us real people. And so how AI and data actually serves good, right?
Right.
Yeah.
It's so and there are many examples. If you think about it, we not only participate in projects, but you see, because people. I've been around IT for a long time. I know a lot of people that are participating in different kind of projects, and I can tell you, probably right now across Latin America, there's like a dozen major cities that are running projects powered by AI. And again, image recognition technology, like for traffic management and reducing carbon footprint, and also try to, make a better citizen experience, for people commuting within the cities. There's a lot of that going on in the private sector. I continue to see companies, pushing operational improvements, as I said before, using AI engineering squads to literally kind of play around models and figure out how they can help. So basically, they trust so much in the technology that they basically just build a team that is going to be playing around, modeling with hypothesis, and trying to come up with something that works, and creating dozens out of hundreds of hypotheses, creating dozens of models that save them hundreds, millions, and even hundreds of millions of dollars. Companies that I know of, this is real data, and it's so interesting that this is happening across Latin America, right? So it's not only kind of, yeah, let's play around with POCs. It's happening, it's game on, right? So it's a lot of real stuff happening there.
Right. Marcos, you did mention this before in the beginning and throughout our chat, and I want to make sure I'm getting it right. Investment, international investment. So it seems like Latin America is attracting a lot of investment these days. And is that a recent development and more than before? And how come?
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot of investment. Again, it's usually as compared to other regions, we see an inflow of investments specifically in startups. As I said, there's a big market opportunity because, if you think about the development of, let's say, convergence into IT, right? So basically IT convergence. There's an IT convergence that is happening a little later than in other regions. So basically, that lateness, was bringing is a big opportunity for startups and investment funds to come and invest, right? So that's been happening for a while, and it's a matter, it has to do with the social kind of lining of how things work in Latin America. It comes from the social aspect of the population in Latin America, right? But we see an increasingly supportive regulatory framework. Again, growing digital economies, a lot of market potential, as I said before. As I believe, and there was something that I read a couple of days ago. It's like probably there was a little of a drawback in investment over the past year, in 2023, but it's picking up already, right? So it's like we were like 9% below, but in general, foreign investment has been strong across the top markets in Latin America, specifically Brazil and Mexico, that secured, I believe, like more than $60 billion in investment over 2023, and 30 billion that was for Brazil, and 30 billion for Mexico. So it's super interested how that illustrates. There's a trend and there's a possibility to capture this trend and do something about it. There's a lot of interest from the people that know, the money people, that know where to put their money. There are strong signs, and there have been for a while, that Latin America, has something to it.
That sounds actually really positive and strong and optimistic, and I love hearing that. But I just have to know, out of curiosity, there also must be some challenges, right? The hurdles of businesses operating in the tech scene over there. Would you comment maybe on a few?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a laughing matter for me, because obviously there's a ton of opportunity, but what opportunity comes without its challenges, right? So there's a lot of challenge to overcome in the region. I think that the major one is the regulatory and kind of bureaucratic complexity of some of the countries across the region. So it's very different across different countries. So it's difficult to to believe that any company can invest in the same way all across Latin America, it's complex, right? Because one country will allow certain things, another country will allow certain other things, and specifically, you know, that creates a certain landscape so that local companies, local from Latin America, let's say, they're trying to move their AI powered solutions to other countries. It could be a challenge because there could be a regulatory difference between one country and the other. So it's not homogeneous, so that it's easy to actually move your stuff through the region. Even worse when you're outside, probably you have created an AI powered solution that is basically building up on obviously tons of data that you have collected, and you run following GDPR, and probably you try to go into one of the Latin American countries, and it's not quite the same, right? So for data specifically, and for AI projects that rely so heavily on data, there is a tricky kind of, especially tricky in the realm of data protection and privacy compliance. So I think that the regulatory kind of side it's difficult, and additionally to this, there's a certain volatility of currencies, as I said before, in the example of people using money and having to kind of you use your backpack as a wallet. You were saying when you came to Argentina, for example. So yeah, there's some of that also kind of makes it a little more intricate. If we had more currency stability, it would be a little different for sure. And lastly, obviously, there's a growing pool of tech talent across the region. But again, the big opportunity makes it so that some of the global players are trying to tap into Latin American talent, and therefore they're pushing really strongly on the market. So that can create another challenge for local and foreign companies getting talent across the region.
Marcos, and is there enough talent, or is there a shortage?
the big question, right? the hard one. There's a growing pool of tech talent, as I said. It emerges across Latin America. There are many universities, coding boot camps producing skilled graduates. Now more than ever, we used to think, yeah, you have to have like an engineering degree to do this, but it's wrong. It's basically wrong. There's a lot of really, really talented people in IT that, have emerged from some coding boot camp, but they're just brilliant and they do things amazingly well, and they are interested in understanding, the how to really build systems properly, right? But at the same time, there's a shortage because there's a lot of demand happening. So a lot of companies, what they're doing is, trying to work with outside companies like ours, to eventually to augment while they build the young talent, and eventually we help them kind of leverage the situation and keep productive while they're building their teams. That's a thing that we do. Others, basically outsource to companies, some of that work and some of that, hypothesis around AI and building models and whatnot. There are some companies that are trusting third parties to outsource, which is also, it's good and it helps the market catch up. But there's a lot of opportunity right now. It makes it so that there's a lot of players trying to tap into the talent. So sometimes, demand is basically bigger than the offer, so it's difficult. But the key is young talent. To me, for us and for every company out there, the key is building the young talent. Not thinking, not being selfish about that aspect. And thinking that when you're building young talent, you're helping people grow. You're just doing something good for humanity. You're putting people out there that are now capable of doing something greater. And eventually, as all things and karma, it will come back, and eventually we'll also benefit from that if people eventually walk away after they were trained by you. So I think that it's a great setup. It's a great setup that makes us all think, how to resolve.
Oh, yeah, that's a great point. Marcos, we are now at my favorite part of the podcast, which is predicting the future a little bit. And I want to ask you, so looking ahead, what do you think is next for Latin American Tech Center? Or what should the world be paying attention to? That's
Latin America, it's really proving to be, again, not just a follower, but a leader in tech innovation. We have many, many needs that we serve locally with AI, with innovation, with building software, with developing data centers and infrastructure that can support those solutions. But it's for us, So it's basically not necessarily just for the rest of the world. So it's also for the rest of the world, but there's a genuine local need that is being served by this local need. So basically, we have to stop thinking of LATAM just an emerging market. It's really a powerhouse in the making, and I think we should ask for that. We should see ourselves as that. So yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Maybe just to follow up on that question, do you personally have any unpopular opinions on the topic? Hot takes?
Yeah, sometimes I find myself not arguing, but having, discussions with colleagues and people from the industry. Probably one huge misconception is that Latin America is just a place for outsourcing tech talent, and getting developers by the kilo. Outsourcing is indeed part of the story, and definitely is what took us to this place, right? So there's a technography ladder that we have to climb, but we're not longer at only serving people for other regions' projects, right? It's part of the story, and we do it. But the real narrative is about homegrown innovation. The world needs to wake up to the fact that some of the most exciting developments in AI, FinTech, and digital transformation are happening actually in the region, Latin America. So yeah.
Oh, that's such a strong point and a great way to wrap up today's discussion. Marcos, thank you so much for sharing all your insights. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you so much. The pleasure was all mine, and I wish you all the very best. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you to our listeners of BizTech Forward. And if you enjoyed this episode, please like, share, subscribe. And remember, we always want to hear from you. Any thoughts, insights, questions of your own? Reach out to us at biztechforward@dataart.com. That's all for today, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for tuning in to BizTech Forward. If you enjoyed the podcast, please subscribe and share to help us reach more listeners. Thank you for being part of the conversation. See you next time.